Hi, my name's Abbie and I'm an assistant psychologist within HSC. My role is split between CAMHS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, and the Adult Learning Disability Service. And I'm here today to talk to you a bit about parental mental health and child development. So just as a bit of an overview about what I'll be speaking about tonight, I'll first just give an overview of what are the most common types of mental health problems in the UK and a bit about their symptoms. I'll then talk a bit about the impact of depression and anxiety on children's development, and then I'll go on to speak a bit about how we can minimise the impact of this. So how common are mental health problems? Well, it's been found that they are actually quite common, so 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem at some point in their life. So this means that you will probably know or know of someone who has experienced a mental health problem, or you might even have experienced one yourself. So there's a survey done every 7 years, and the Mind website uses this for their stats. So the last one was done in 2009, and it found that mixed anxiety and depression is the most common type of mental health problem in Great Britain. Following this are anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. On the basis of these figures, I will be talking mainly about anxiety and depression tonight. So the symptoms of depression are quite complex and vary quite a lot between people, but generally if you feel depressed you feel quite sad, hopeless and lose interest in the things you like doing in your day-to-day life. These symptoms persist for weeks or even months, and they're significant enough to impact on your social, work and family life. So I've just listed a few on the slide here. So you can see it says low mood, physical changes, so change in appetite, energy, sleep, and also social, so that loss of interest in things. So as with depression, the symptoms of anxiety they vary between people, but it's generally a feeling of unease and a feeling of worry or fear about something. And anxiety is the main symptom of a range of issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder, phobia disorder, and social anxiety disorder. Generalised anxiety disorder is kind of a general sense of worry or fear about a range of situations rather than just a specific event. So again, I've just put a couple of symptoms on the slide, split into psychological and physical. And again, people vary within this. Some people will only have 1 or 2 symptoms, some might have them all. So there is a lot of variance between people. So what is the prevalence of parents with a mental health problem? Well, there's been some large-scale surveys that have found between 9 and 10% of women and 5 and 6% of men will be parents with a mental health condition at any one time in Great Britain. Most of these will be parents with anxiety and depression. However, there is a smaller subset, about 0.5%, that will have psychotic illness such as schizophrenia. Also, it's important to note that because the symptoms of things like anxiety and depression come and go over time, it is likely that a much higher number than this will experience being a parent with a mental health problem. So what impact does mental health problems have on children? Well, children rely on their parents for practical and emotional support as they grow up. And if a parent has a mental illness, then this support can change. Although most can continue as they were before, effectively parenting their children, some people might find it a bit more difficult. The impact depends on a range of things such as the type, severity and duration of mental illness. Also, some children will have characteristics that make them more able to cope with mental illness, and this can be things like the child's age, their gender, temperament, intelligence. I'll go on to talk a bit more about this later. Also, in a few minutes, I'll elaborate a bit more on the specific impact of anxiety and depression. In general, a parent with a mental illness may struggle to cope with their parenting role, or they may find that there's a change in the balance of the relationship with their child, especially if the child has to take on a more caring role of their parent. Some parents try to hide their mental illness from the children, but this is probably done with the best of intentions and to protect their child. But many children have said that they find it much less anxiety-provoking if they are, in fact, given more information about it. It's quite well known in research that mental illness has a genetic component, so if a parent has a mental illness then their child is more likely to as well. But the influence of these genes is affected by the environment and the early experiences of the child. So it's thought that the environment may impact upon this just as much as genetic makeup. So the general impact on children, while some children might worry they're to blame for their parents' mental illness, especially if they're not given enough information about it. Children may also take on inappropriate care roles for their parents. So for example, they might take on household management, social support, emotional support, maybe even personal care. And some children may end up being in charge of their parents' medication, which obviously isn't an ideal situation for a young child to be in. Having a parent with a mental illness can elicit some strong emotions such as fear, anger and hopelessness. This can lead them to have difficulties concentrating, maybe at school, so this can lead to some underachievement. Lastly, because of the stigma surrounding mental illness and because Guernsey is quite a small place, it's particularly relevant here, children might become isolated from their peers or have a feeling of shame or embarrassment about their parent's mental illness, particularly if their parent is seen to be acting a little bit odd to some people. So just before I go on to talk about the impact of depression, it's important to note that the majority of research in this area has been done with mothers. So there's barely any research on the effect of paternal depression. This is probably because mothers tend to take on the caregiving role of their children, but nevertheless, more research needs to be done of the effect of dad's mental illness. So maternal depression can impact on the socio-emotional and cognitive development of children, and this impact can be seen across all life stages of the child, not just one stage, so it happens right from the prenatal period up until adolescence. So in terms of the prenatal child, well, if a mother is depressed and pregnant, she is going to be producing more stress chemicals such as cortisol, and this will be passed on to the baby. And this increase in stress chemicals has been linked to reduced fetal growth and also to premature labour. The majority of research in this area has been done on the impact of maternal depression on infancy, and this is because it's been found that infancy is a really critical time for the development of the brain. So healthy development depends on the interactive influence of genes and the environment, and these interactions help to shape the architecture of the developing brain, so it helps to really make those connections in the brain and develop the brain in a healthy way. The active ingredient of these experiences is sometimes termed mutual responsiveness, or the serve and return of interactions. So for example, if a baby babbles towards their parent and the parent responds by gesturing, attention or speech, then this leads the baby to know that their mum is going to interact with them, and this develops the connections in the brain. This then is the foundation for learning, behaviour and health that follow. And on a daily basis, a baby will engage their mother in these sorts of interactions, hundreds of times really. If the mother is depressed, this then compromises the degree to which they're able to participate in these interactions, and this might have adverse effects on the developing brain. So there's two types of behaviour that mothers might display if they're depressed towards their child that disrupt this serve and return of interactions. So a mother might become intrusive towards their child, meaning they'll react with more hostile affect. This may then disrupt the infant's activity. The infant might become angry and turn away from their mother, and then they might internalise this anger as a more protective way of coping. On the other hand, mothers may respond with withdrawal and be more disengaged towards their child. Therefore, they're not as responsive to the children's cues and do little to support their children's activity. The infant therefore is able to cope and self-regulate these negative emotions and may develop passivity or withdrawal as a way of coping. So in the serve and return we were talking about before, an intrusive mother will be serving the ball in a way that is too difficult for the infant to respond, so they're communicating with them in a way that the infant doesn't know how to respond. Whereas with the withdrawn mother, the infant is serving the ball and trying to get their mother to communicate with them, but the mother is just disengaged and not really responding effectively. In both of these cases, the depressed mother is less likely to respond to their infant's cues and respond with positive interactions. If this happens for a long period of time, then the game of serve and return falls apart, and this can have adverse effects on the developing brain. These kind of patterns are worrisome because once these negative interactions are established within an infant, then they're more likely to persist even after the maternal depression is improved, and they might even extend to other adults in the child's life. So in terms of toddlers, a depressed mother might be less attentive towards their toddler. They might also be a poor role model for mood regulation and problem solving. They're also less likely to set limits on their toddler's behaviour and less likely to follow through on these limits when they are put in place. The toddler can seem hard to handle, defiant, negative, and this further reinforces the parent's sense of failure in their parenting and can lead to more inconsistent parenting. Within school-aged children, research has shown that maternal depression can lead school-aged children to have impaired adaptive functioning and be more at risk of psychopathology, so for example things like depression and conduct disorder. There's also some research that shows the link between maternal depression and the development of ADHD in school-aged children. In terms of adolescence, well, adolescence is already quite a vulnerable time for the development of affective disorders. So if an adolescent has a depressed mother, then they're more at risk of psychosocial maladjustment and psychopathology, so things like anxiety and depression. In addition to this, any of the problems that have already accumulated in early life will persist, so for example ADHD will persist into adolescence. However, it's important to remember throughout this presentation that although these are some of the impacts that can happen, it won't happen to everyone. Not all depressed mothers will have children that necessarily go on to have these issues. There are some exacerbating and moderating factors. So some exacerbating factors include marital conflict, reduced social support and poverty. And some moderating factors include things like the child's gender. Research has shown that boys are more sensitive to the effects of maternal depression than girls. The child's temperament can also come into play, so a child who's more easygoing will be less sensitive to the negative interactions. And also if a child has higher social and cognitive skills, then they're more likely to be able to seek out other adults with which to have positive interactions with, and this will reduce their feelings of rejection. So the impact of anxiety on children is less researched than depression, but we do know that infancy is a vulnerable period for the impact of anxiety due to the rapid development that's taking place. So anxiety is thought to be a detailed interplay between the genes and the environment. So although a child is more likely to be anxious if their parents are because they inherit these genes, the environment also has a big role to play. And actually, you don't inherit particular anxiety disorders from your parents, rather you inherit the characteristic that makes you more likely to develop anxiety at some point in your life. So the implication of this is, even though we can't change our genetics, we're born with our genes, that's the way it is, we can change the environment, so we can do things to try and avoid the development of anxiety in children's lives. And some of the ways we can do this I'll come on to later in the presentation. So what we do know is that if a parent has anxiety, it's likely to alter their parenting in the form of reduced productive engagement, withdrawn or disengaged behaviour, reduced warmth towards their child perhaps, and an increased catastrophising. The children therefore learn from their parent that the world is an unsafe place. They learn from their parents' behaviour and they learn by example. So for example, if a parent's reacting in a certain way to something, the child's going to think, oh, maybe this is the way I should be reacting to it because that's what mum's doing. Also, if a child grows up with an anxious parent, the parent's probably quite likely to be quite overprotective of them, therefore not exposing them to situations that might make them anxious. The child, in a sense, isn't getting the chance to feel anxious, so when they are, it feels a lot worse. It's important to remember that this can also work the other way around. So if a child develops anxiety, then the parents are obviously going to be quite worried about this, and this can have an impact on the parenting that they give their child. So what can be done to help minimise this? Well, first of all, if you are a parent and you're concerned about your mental health, then getting help for that is a good first step. So the way to do this on the island is to go to your GP and discuss with them the possibility of a referral to mental health services. The second way is to look after your own mental health. So The most up-to-date research suggests that there's 5 things we can all incorporate into our everyday lives to make us feel better. And this isn't just people with mental health problems, all of us can benefit from this to improve our mental health and well-being. So the first of these is connect. Just connect with people around you. It could be friends, neighbours, people you don't even know that well. Making those connections really does have a positive impact on your everyday life. The second of these is be active. Now this doesn't mean going for a 5-mile run every day, it just means getting out there, doing something that makes you feel a bit better about yourself. It could just be going for a walk, getting outside, or just moving about. And most importantly, it's important to find an exercise that you enjoy. There's no point going for a 5-mile run every day if it makes you miserable. Just find something that works for you. Take notice. Just take more notice of the things around you and take a moment to savour the moment. Doing so helps you to appreciate the things that are around you. The fourth of these is keep learning. And again, this doesn't have to be anything big. It can just be taking on new responsibilities at work. It could be taking up a new hobby, or it could be something like signing up for a course. It's very rewarding to learn things and realise that you're capable of more than you thought, and you might even surprise yourself. And finally, give. It could be your time, or just a smile, or a thank you to someone, or even volunteering. This is very rewarding and can help to make connections with the people around you. Finally, I've just put on the slide there about early intervention, because it's been found that when children are suffering from some issues because of their parents' mental health, early intervention is key. So research has shown that the earlier you can intervene, the better. The research also shows that although focusing on the mother's mental health is good and that improves her mental health, the best outcomes are made when the child-parent relationship is taken into account and those really important interactions. So what do children say they want from when they have a parent with a mental health problem? Well, most importantly, they say they want clear information and explanations about their parent's mental illness. Children have a tendency to imagine the worst, so when they're given more information, it can reduce their fear. And it can also help with the guilt, because they realise that actually they're not to blame. Children also want someone reliable, consistent and caring to talk to. This doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of formal counselling, just someone that's there, a space to talk, someone they can ask questions of, and this provides them with much needed encouragement and support. And it can also help give information about, for example, what to do in a crisis, because that's obviously really important for children to know. Children might also want practical help with their day-to-day lives, so especially if they're in one of these caring roles I was talking about before. So what's happening in Guernsey? Well, the States of Guernsey have recently released a new draft of the Children and Young Persons Plan, and within this, one of their main objectives is early intervention to give children the best start in life. Within this, there's the 1001 Critical Days project. This is based on the idea that stress between the age of 0 and 2 has quite a significant impact on the neurological development of the child. Now, there's several strands to the project, and I think it's in quite early days, but it aims to identify mothers and babies that are most at risk of these negative effects and target them with positive support to try and offset these negative behaviours. This will then lead to increased life chances for these children and reduce the likelihood of them needing to access mental health services in the future. 1001 Days offers group and individual support to the parents most at risk, and this is currently due to be reviewed in 2020, I think, as part of the Children and Young People's Plan. Thank you very much.